Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's Robert Phoenix, broadcasting to you live from Fredericksburg. Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast, where we get far out, traveling the highways and the byways of synaptical connections inside and outside the matrix, from the sacred to the profane, from the root to the fruit, from Kether to Malkuth. This is where it's at every Friday at 12 noon. So, Central Standard Time. What's happening out there? What's going on with y'all? Y'all. It's a very nice day here in Texas. It's starting to shift into fall. The oppressive sub-Saharan African heat is abating. And now we get a little cool breeze. But it's still going to be pretty warm. And some of the best time of the year for weather. We have had another kind of serious flood issue down in Houston, again, Imelda. Imelda took a dump on Houston. Not as bad as Harvey, but still, you know, people flooded out. It's abated. It has kind of moved inland now and is dissipating. So, wacky, wild weather. It's such a nice day. It's a great day to be protesting. Apparently, kids across all the country are staying home from school or walking out of school. There's a big climate deal happening next week in New York City. I guess it's happening at the UN, and all the countries of the world are going to basically demand that we follow the Paris Accord, which is basically kind of a global doctrine to turn us all into serfs. Just go without, do less, do with less, go without, practice austerity. That's the Saturn, Capricorn, Pluto, Capricorn, South Node. And just remember, when some person is practicing austerity somewhere, somebody else is living high on the hog. That's always been the case. It's always been the case in human history. And it's the people that can navigate, squirm, blackmail, strong arm, bludgeon, bribe, sleep their way to the top. Those are the people who live by a different set of rules than the rest of us, or the rest of humanity. And climate change and the ensuing policies that would essentially be enacted through climate change wouldn't change much at all. It would be kind of the same old paradigm, the same old program, and it would just be another ism to replace another ism that replaced the other ism before it. Now, does the environment need to be addressed? You bet your ass it does. We need to stop spraying the skies with geoengineered aerosol spray. No more bug spray. That would be a good place to start. Believe it or not, most of the plastic that's in the oceans and polluting the oceans is coming from, I hate to say it, underdeveloped countries, because they don't recycle. You know, we have too much recycling here. We got way too much plastic to recycle in this country. But we do recycle. Let's be clear about that. But nobody talks about where those plastics originate from. That's got to change, obviously. Yeah, moving the people to the United States where they can recycle their plastic isn't really the solution. Not in my head. When we talk about climate change, nobody really talks about China, who's one of the world's greatest polluters. I remember seeing a PBS documentary quite a few years back, which was basically somebody in Seattle taking a spectrometer reading of the air. And they were able to determine their contents in the air in Seattle that it originated all the way from China. Nobody talks about the depleted uranium that's used in the many incursions into the Middle East and North Africa, all for the quest to spread democracy and rid the world of its evil governments that want to essentially run themselves. We're not going to talk about the depleted uranium, which again is circulating through our atmosphere. We're not going to talk about what happened with the refinery in the Gulf right? Core exit and all the stuff that core exit is what they put into the ocean. And essentially it's just this massive blob. All the core exit is just this massive blob that's kind of like hanging out beneath the surface of the water, beneath the surface of the Gulf, because they sprayed core exit in there for a couple of years to break down the oil, right? So if there's any really massive like tsunami action or massive hurricane stuff, that core exit's going to come right back up to the surface. Nobody talks about that. I mean, we've got issues, okay, but they're not the ones that are usually addressed at all. You know, we have issues with our land and monocropping and using genetically modified organisms. If you want to throw in the microwave of all the cell phones and all the wireless routers that are cooking the ionosphere, and we could throw those in there too, but nobody talks about that. It's just the same old pat bullshit that we have to live with less. We have to lighten our carbon footprint, which includes, by the way, the discontinuation of eating meat, okay? That is part of the climate change program, is to get people to stop eating meat because meat is wasteful. Well, what are you going to do with all the cows? What's going to happen with all the cows? Are we just going to let the cows run loose? Is India the new model now? Or is the cow going to retain its kind of sacred status? And we're just going to get milk and cheese? But don't vegans like not eat milk and cheese? Isn't that an animal protein? Isn't that disallowed? I think it is. So what do you do with all the cows? Are you going to start killing cows in order to get the carbon footprint down? I mean, there's a lot of questions here to answer. And quite frankly, it's not a scenario or future that I'm all that really thrilled about. But there are people that firmly believe in this, and they believe in it so much that they have mobilized the youth of America and the youth of the world, led by Greta Thunberg, who is their Joan of Arc. She's the Joan of Arc of the climate change movement. The children are the children of the corn, and they have been essentially handled and organized by adults so that they can take advantage of this kind of, you know, Pluto and Sagittarian kind of desire to get to the truth, theoretically. And the truth to them is what their adults are telling them and what a version of science is telling them, and it's junk science. We're headed into a solar minimum, and the real issue on the planet is, at some levels, what's going on with the permafrost as well. And the permafrost is tending to warm up a little bit here. So we have a lot of methane that's escaping into the atmosphere, which is not good at all. So we do have some issues, but they're not the ones that they're creating. The ones that they're creating are a scenario that is not just about climate change. It's about a complete paradigm change, and not in the best way either. And I hate it when kids get manipulated. It's like, let them grow up a little bit. Let them find out what's really going on if they can. If they can, before it's all wiped away from the internet. Let's hope they can do it. Let's hope they can find some truth instead of being stewarded and guided by the Judas goats who are their adult leadership. So a very interesting photo, which I'm not going to post, but if you're interested at all, go to Jim Stone's site. He's got a photo theoretically of the Sandy Hook girls all grown up. Well, not grown up, but teenagers. Somebody passed that on to me. I'm not going to post it. If you're interested, go to Jim Stone's site, jimstone.is. You'll see the photo. I went to go see it in another part of the internet. It had been removed. So if you have any interest in the most modern blasphemy, also known as Sandy Hook, go to his website, check it out, decide for yourself. Speaking of Sandy Hook, Jim Fetzer is about to take a big fall. He and his publisher are getting ramrodded and railroaded. Jim tried to defend himself in court. Shouldn't have done it. He should have hired a lawyer. You know, whoever represented Wolfgang Halbig, I wonder if Wolfgang represented himself, but Wolfgang actually, he won against Leonard Posner. And Leonard never showed up for court, but apparently they were ready this time for Jim Fetzer. Jim made some mistakes and he was found in contempt of court because he was trying to introduce evidence that showed that there were different faces, different people, different death dates involved, and the judge wouldn't allow it. So I think Jim actually talked about it outside of court, and he was forced to pay $3,000 upon his next court appearance. And that's just for the contempt of court charge. That's not what he's going to have to pay Lenny Posner. So Jim Fetzer is probably going to be ruined financially. I mean, I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know if he's got, you know, some kind of GoFundMe thing going on or not. People are supporting him. But, not everybody likes Jim Fetzer, but he was trying to expose something. And for better or worse, he got caught in a big bear trap. So did Alex Jones. Wolfgang Halbig, ironically, did not. So let me check in with you guys in the chat room. Let's see what's happening here. Let's see. We got, who's that? Errol Croy. Hello, Errol. Errol Croy. Hello. There's the infamous 108 Dragon 14. There's Dawn. Oh, yeah, Dawn's down in Houston. Yeah, I heard about it, Dawn. There's Jenny. Hey, Marcos, what's going on, man? The purple one is in the house. There's Jennifer Rubin and Cato. Sir Charles Arthur. Fate has me here just as the show is starting. I never really thought of your shows as a scheduled, except the Sunday evening one, Roberts. Kind of like the surprise element. Here you go, Sir Stephen Charles Arthur. Welcome. Jessica Lynn, she says, heartbreaking. Dawn, stay safe. It was as bad as Harvey. Okay, Dawn, thank you for setting the record straight. People flooded that did not flood in Harvey because all the rain came in one day. Hope you're okay, Dawn. I talked with good friend Lisa down there. She seemed okay. They had some of the freeways and expressways closed yesterday. There's Scoobs. Cato says over 100 in Japan. Big typhoon. There's Natasha. Hi, Natasha. There's Joe. And who else we have here? There's the ubiquitous Ani Brito. She's everywhere. And let's see. Spyro Cosmos Art. Hello there. Ethical omnivorism. I like that. There's Mary. Hi, Mary and Sherry. Mary and Sherry. Tanya. Hey, Joni. How you doing? Chaos Engagement. All right. We got a show here. We got some people watching. So there's a lot going on. I did an interview with my buddy Stephen Kent yesterday. That's going to be the bulk of the show. And lasts about, I don't know, about 45, 50 minutes. And Stephen's a good friend, and he's going to be performing here in the Hill Country on the 12th of October. And Stephen and I go back a long ways. We got to know each other around 1993. So, you know, do the math on that. We're going on, 2019, so 26 years, right? Let's see, 2013, yeah, so 26 years. I've known Stephen for a quarter of a century, and he's one of the coolest, nicest, most generous, funny, intelligent, talented, kind-hearted people that I've ever met in my life, and he's touched a lot of lives with his music and his spirit. And if you're in the Bay Area this week, he's playing at East West Books in Palo Alto, so you can go check him out there. I don't know if it's tonight or tomorrow night, but he'll be here in the Hill Country in a couple of weeks, performing live at the Gillespie County Cultural Center. So I'm going to get into the interview with Stephen, but a lot has been happening. You know, there's been this big election in Israel, but it feels like, meet the old boss, new boss, same as the old boss. Benny Gantz is an IDF general. He's kind of a soft Likud. He may not have the same kind of radical annexation plans that Netanyahu's not out of the picture yet. He's refusing to resign. He's stomping his feet. He's going to use every trick in the book to stay in power. Trust me. And this guy is, Netanyahu is like a cockroach. You know, he can survive an atomic blast. And one of the things that Netanyahu's got on his plate are these corruption charges. Oh, Imagine that. Politician with corruption charges. Anyway, if he is out of office, then there's a really good chance that those corruption charges are going to stick to him. So probably what he's doing is he's probably negotiating his package or his buyout. Like, okay, I'm going to stay around and, I'll force a third election unless you guarantee that I'm not going to do any time now or ever. And I'll walk away. I think that's probably what he's doing. Because if you're Benny Gantz or you're somebody who's in that party, the blue and white party, whatever that party is, sounds like a cruise line, right? The blue and white party. Hey, would you want him around? You wouldn't want him around. You wouldn't want that guy hanging out. I mean, he would be a total shit disturber because that's what he is. You'd want him out. So you want him either on ice or you'd want him out of the country. And, Netanyahu used to live in the United States. He lived here for quite a while. And Michael Jones went to the same college as Netanyahu. How about that? Isn't that interesting? He talks about that. So I think he's probably negotiating his release, so to speak. And he's going to be probably somebody will show up in like a think tank or something, or he'll be involved in some kind of surveillance shit, since he knows all about that stuff. And it's a really big business now between Israel and the United States, apparently. He'll be on Fox News. Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm very happy to be on Fox News. I had a great time being the Prime Minister of Israel, and we're still very good friends with the United States. And even though Donald Trump did not tweet for me, I still think of him as a very good friend. It's not bad, Netanyahu. Yeah, Trump left him out in the cold. Trump didn't tweet him. He didn't tweet him. See, this is what I've been saying about Trump for a long time. You can't trust him. You can't trust Donald Trump. Even Benjamin Netanyahu cannot trust Donald Trump. Can't. It's one of the beautiful things about Trump, I have to say. It's kind of like it's sort of like how would I explain it? It's sort of like a universal sociopathology that is open to everybody. It's the indiscriminate kind of pivot. He'll pivot on anybody. That's Trump with the Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, and he's just done a pivot on Netanyahu. Left him out in the cold, hung him out to dry. He basically said, "Oh, we'll work with anybody." And and the next thing is it'll be like, Prime Minister Gantz and I go back a long way. We've been good friends for a long time. I've known him for many years. I think he'll do a fantastic job, just a fantastic job. And I'm going to talk to him the first chance I can get, because Israel's so important to the United States. I got a great relationship with Israel. They love me. And I love them. Did you know I'm on a coin there? They put me on a coin. That's what he'll do. He'll just move on. See you, BB. But I don't think Gantz is going to be. He's no dove. This guy was a heavy duty guy, and he's Netanyahu. Of course, everybody serves and does military time in Israel, which, by the way, I don't think it's a bad thing. I know. I maybe sound like a bit of a neocon here, but I don't think it's a bad thing. You know why? I'll tell you why. Because when those people get out of the IDF, they have got 2 years worth of like indoctrination and being drilled. And so one of the things that's really important is that they're kind of now linked in to this sort of the tabula rasa of their country and their culture, for better or worse, whatever you think of Israel, right? They're linked in. So when they like pull guys out of the IDF and put them into Project 8200, which is a really big high-tech unit, they drill them like IDF people. And they say, you're going to do this. They're going to get paid. It's not like they're working for Jeff Bezos. I guess maybe they will be working for Jeff Bezos, but they'll get better wages. But they will be drilled hard, and so that they can accomplish these kinds of titanic or gargantuan tasks, right? And that's what happens. And they're asked, well, why? Why are you doing this? Because you've got to do it for the people. You've got to do it for our people. You got to do it for our country. And so what do? It's a special blend of like nationalism and tribalism and, kind of religious dogmatism all rolled into one. And so what we have, or what they have, is a form of cohesion. And not everybody there goes along with the party, just like not everybody here goes along with the party here. But that's what they do, right? And that's why you look at say what you want, very successful country in terms of the world, right? They get shit done. It's not always above board. They were just caught spying last week. You know what I'm saying? So, but they get stuff done. It doesn't have to be that extreme. I don't think it has to be that extreme, but people need to be able to buy into something. It's like, what are we doing here? What are we building? What's the plan? What's the goal? What's the mission? What's the future? Trump is like, oh, let's make America great again. From what I've seen, it's a disassembling of some of the social structures. He's being very disruptive. I get that. But there's no plan moving forward about what to do to make it great. How do you, maybe, by not enabling California and pushing back on sort of their China owns most of California, by the way. A lot of people have pushed back on me on that. They bought a shitload of property in California. They own a ton. I would be surprised if Gavin Newsom is just taking orders from Xi at this point. But there's a pushback there. So I guess maybe the pushback is part of the process. But if it were up to me, I would have to, right when you get out of high school, you spend 2 years of service to the country. You spend 1 year military. I'm sorry, it's the way it is, right? Training, physical training. What do you do in the IDF? You learn Krav Maga and all that stuff. Physical training. If you have to be deployed somewhere, whatever that is, you spend a year doing that, and then you spend a year in kind of the social world, helping out on infrastructure, whatever those things are. You put your 2 years in, and you get those 2 years, you get paid a little bit of money, not a ton. You get room, you get board, food, room and board, some clothing, whatever. But those 2 years would go to education. Plus, you would get some kind of a GI Bill of some sort as well. So you could take, basically you're getting paid for 2 years. You apply that to either a trade school or maybe a 2-year, maybe a 4-year school with kind of a GI Bill thing built in for the following 2 years. And there you go. And you do that, right? You do that for 10 years, 12 years, and you got a generation of people now who are indoctrinated in building something. Okay, building something, and they got to buy in. That's what I would do. And just like in Israel or Sweden, once you go through your training, guess what? You get to keep your gun, because that's what they do. You get to keep your rifle, because you're always kind of on call at that point. It doesn't matter if you're a male or female. I mean, Israel doesn't matter. So that's what I would do, and I think it could be a really, really good thing. Because all of a sudden now there's a buy-in for whatever it is that we're doing here. If we're playing the nationalist game, if we're playing the country game, the Make America Great Again, or just reinforcing the damn country. And you see, this is where things could get really interesting, because at that point it would be a white thing, a black thing, a brown thing. Everybody's together. Everybody's together. So that's what we call assimilation. Like you're pulling for each other. If you've got any kind, this is what the Army or the Armed Forces does do, right? If you're in a foxhole or you're in a firefight, you don't give a shit what color the person is next to you. You just want to make sure that they got your back, and vice versa. And you're on that level together. It's like we're in it together, right? Because if your chances of getting out of here are amplified if I can make sure that in a critical moment, I've got your back, and vice versa. And that way all this division shit just goes away. Then you have people working on projects together. And we're just so segmented. People talk about diversity. I'm going to talk about diversity. I'm going to move this into diversity because this is where my relationship with Steven and some of the stuff we did when I was living in the Bay Area is actually really cool. And it's a different kind of version of diversity. What diversity means now is just basically, you know, we're going to flood the system and we're going to make sure that the dominant paradigm, you know, which has been, right, is not going to get a leg up. And in fact, it's going to go like this because there's been inequity in the system. And I'm seeing this. They're doing this in the high schools, and grammar schools, middle schools in Austin. This is part of their new education program. They're going to address inequity, inequality, and they're going to enact social justice curriculum in all the schools in Austin. Okay, that's what they're doing. That's where it's headed. So diversity means something very, very different, and that also when we get into the idea of diversity too is like we're just going to hire people because it's the thing to do. Like we're going to hire people, quote unquote, of color because it's the thing to do. It's not about a meritocracy. If somebody has a different skin tone or different religious orientation or whatever, and they're qualified, hire the person. Hire the person. If they're not qualified, then hire the person that is qualified. See, that's where the rub is now. So it's like, well, we need more representation for this community. Well, do they know this program and this program? No, they don't. It's okay. Just get them in here. Just get them in here. We can say that we've done this. We can check the box, and if somebody checks our hiring record, it's going to look good. But is that in the best interest of the business? It's in the best interest of the business when businesses are being held hostage by social interest groups, but it's not in the best interest of the business if they want the business to succeed and flourish and be innovative and really have a standard of quality, achievement, hiring the right people. This is unfortunately what diversity has come to mean on a number of different levels. But let me jump into something here. Well, let me take this in another direction that you guys might kind of understand and appreciate, because it's really funny. Let me make this just a little bit bigger. So the big stink now, if you've not been following the news, the big stink now is that's Justin Trudeau. Apparently, Justin Trudeau has a fetish for blackface. Now, quite frankly, I don't see anything wrong with this picture, okay? I find this patently less offensive than the governor of Virginia. Well, I just dressed up like Michael Jackson one time and I was in a dance contest. I just love Michael Jackson. Yeah, we could just abort that baby right after the mother has it. We'd make it real comfortable. Make the mother real comfortable. We bring in the right people, talk to her. Make sure that the right decision is being made. He's still the governor. He's still the governor of Virginia. And his blackface is pretty bad. Now, look at Justin Trudeau here, okay? He likes to dress up as like this Aladdin character. I think there's more than one shot of him, or maybe it's the same party. I don't know. It might be the same party. But like he's got these two guys there. Why do they look like Sikhs, right? I mean, they look like legitimate Sikhs. Now, are they pissed off? Are they pissed off at Justin Trudeau? Like, I'm not a fan of Justin Trudeau. I think he's a soy boy, and I'm not a fan. But I don't think that this is something that they should impeach him for. He's lost a radio show because of this. Now, granted, there are a couple of other pictures where it's not so costumery, perhaps, but he wanted to kind of look like one of his Sikh brothers. They're not having any problems with it. Oh yes, yes, yes. Come take a picture with us. He actually pulls this thing off pretty well. Maybe he should just get a skin transfusion. You know what the hypocrisy is? Hypocrisy is you get some guy in the United States who's like around, about 55, 56 years old, who's trans and self-identifies as a 6-year-old girl. And that's okay. That's okay. And some couple adopts him. Who knows what they do? That's okay. But he can't do this. In the midst of a party where it's probably 1,001 Arabian Nights or whatever it is, he can't do this. I can't believe I'm sticking up for the guy. So people, this is the wacky double standard. Oh yeah, diversity. We love diversity. We promote diversity. Well, look, he's actually in a weird way celebrating diversity. In a weird way, he's being very diverse. And yet the same people that promote diversity look at this picture and say, you can't do that. However, if you did want to begin a sex change operation and self-identify as a 6-year-old, it's okay. I mean, people wonder why the world is fucked up. It's those weird double standards. I don't find, color me wrong. I don't find anything offensive about this. Now he's got some other photos. Look, maybe he scored that night. You know what I mean? Or maybe he did the blackface thing one night and he was really popular with the ladies. He's like, geez, if I could only pull this off full time. You know what they say, once you go blackface, you never go backface. That's not really true. But, maybe he's just acting something out in his life. I don't find this offensive. And I don't even like the guy. I think he's a crappy leader. And I think he was appointed by his New World Order handlers. But I don't find this offensive. And I find it hypocritical that the champions of diversity can't see that there are these two Sikh brothers here who have no problem hanging out with Justin Trudeau, who's playing Aladdin. If anything, they should be celebrating the fact that he's trying the costume on. What's it feel like? What's it feel like to be like that? How does it feel? No, instead he's being excoriated, which is what they do in an open air communist system. That's what they do. I've told this story before. I'll tell it again. Back when I lived in Oakland, I used to go to this. I used to go to this furniture store, used furniture store called the Uhuru House, and they would have like used hi-fi equipment and stuff like that. And I'd go there and I'd hang out and I'd talk to the people there. The place, to be quite honest with you, the place was run by these 3 Jewish communists. Okay, there were 3 of them. There was two women and one guy. And one of the women and the guy, they were married. And the other one, I forget her name, but she had curly hair. And I'd go in there and I'd buy stuff and I'd talk to them. And I got to know them. And the curly haired one said, Robert, I can't believe that we're doing this. I'm like, really? If they only knew what was going on. And I was a little naive, to be honest with you. I was kind of awake in some ways, but I wasn't aware of really what they were doing on a street level. That these were people that were subversives. These were CP USA. It was a cell. It was a cell that had a storefront on Grand Avenue in Oakland. And I'm like, oh yeah, interesting. So then one day, I guess she's thinking, well, maybe we can get Robert in. And she hands me their newspaper called The Burning Spear. I'm like, okay. So what they were really tasked with doing was organizing the so-called Black community in Oakland and getting them into the Communist Party and the party, right? That's what they were doing. So I get this newspaper and I go home and I start reading it. And I would say about half the newspaper was allocated, the space was allocated to shaming people in public, specifically. And this one couple specifically, they just completely tore this couple up. They didn't do this, they didn't do that. They operated outside of the rules of the party. They didn't listen. They were going to be shamed right out of existence. And I'm reading this stuff, I'm going, what the fuck? What is this about? And then I realized that this is what they do. And this is what PC culture is an extension of. It's the shaming. It's the public shaming. And most people can't handle public shaming. My God. Try to do an internet show every day, or 5 days a week. I've been doing this for a while. I've had some moments that, not always easy. But many cases, at the first hit to shame, people run. They just run. So all you got to do is just pull out that politically correct gun and, point it at somebody's head and, okay. That's kind of changing though. People are starting to not bend in that direction. But that's what happens. And this is what's happening with Justin Trudeau. Again, I think if you're going to rake the guy over the coals, rake him over the coals for his immigration policy, rake him over the coals for his monetary policy, rake him over the coals for his educational policy. Those things on his record are not great. They are not great. This, what he's doing, is nothing. It's nothing. And it's hypocritical for a culture that promotes diversity so that when one of their own steps out and tries to experience something slightly diverse, they get the scarlet letter. He's done. He is done. And this is a guy, by the way, who they didn't have to compromise him. They didn't have to compromise at all. He'd do whatever they want. So it's not like they're going to put pressure on him. It's not like they're going to say, you got to do this. No, he's just done. See ya, it's over. He got his talk show. He had an appearance on a talk show canceled. This guy's going to get shamed. And, and again, I'm not a big fan, but I'm a fan of humanity, and I'm not a fan of what's happening to him. I'm not. I don't find it offensive. Maybe I'm wrong here. It's kind of like when Paul Simon recorded Graceland. And he went to South Africa, and he employed Ladysmith Black Mambazo. What is that record without their vocals on, Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoe or Graceland? What that record is not that record without the voices of Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And I tell you, the left and the socially conscious or socially aware, they ripped Paul Simon a new asshole because he went to South Africa and he employed these musicians. Like, you can't go to South Africa. You just can't go there. It's kind of like people that don't want to go to the White House to meet with Trump. You can't go there. It's just guilt by association. You go there and you're somehow enabling that regime or that man or whatever. But what did he do? He put money in Ladysmith Black Mambazo's pockets. And I guarantee you that they're probably getting some form of publishing still to this day on those songs. Because Paul Simon's a socially conscious, liberal kind of guy. But this is what I'm talking about. It's that same kind of mindset. Oh, don't go there. That's an evil regime. How could you go there? I mean, by going there, eating in the restaurants and supporting the people and employing Ladysmith Black Mambazo, it's just not allowed. Not allowed. It's the same kind of bullshit I'm talking about. But people are starting to break the chains of political correctness. And when that happens, oh, guess what we have now? We've got more examples of so-called hate speech. Anytime people begin to kind of, break free from their chains, there's an event that happens. And guess what? There's an inversion that takes place. So we're getting really, really close to an inversion moment. Just when something's about to flower, or something's about to explode, or something's about to really open up, there is an event or a series of events that basically resets the clock, and not in always the best way. So this is one of the pitfalls of awakening, because the people, the lords of Saturn, Kronos, the planetary timekeepers, they know this, right? So we're on the clock. Just for shits and giggles, I wanted to look at Justin Trudeau's chart, because you guys like astrology. It's kind of what I do. So I pulled up this chart to find out just what in the world is going on with Justin Trudeau. So here he is. He does have Saturn. He's got Saturn in Gemini. He has Saturn in Gemini at 0 degrees. And it's kind of right on the midheaven there, right? And Gemini is it's duality, two sides. He likes to put on masks. And Saturn's up there, and guess what? Now he's paying the price for it. He's paying the price. The lords of Saturn have spoken. You cannot be that diverse. He's a wannabe. If you look at his photos, the guy he likes to dress up. He's into costumery. He likes to dress up. He likes to dress up as all kinds of things. I mean, I've seen him as a kind of a Native American, a queer, a woman. I mean, he's done all kinds of shit. Anyway, he's paying the price. Saturn and Gemini on the midheaven. But where you really see what's going on with Justin Trudeau, you can't really see it here because you have to visualize it. Here's that true node. It's in Cancer in the 11th house now. Trudeau is at 3 Capricorn in his chart, so he's a pretty early Capricorn. So the transiting node is at 13. So he's got that south node just moving into orb with his sun. So when that south node hits his sun, Justin Trudeau is done. Maybe even before that, but that south node just moved into orb with the sun. And good luck, kid. And he's got this Neptune-Saturn opposition, which I talked about one time, like in relation to Fidel Castro and the father, Saturn being the father in the Neptune opposition. Is this sort of kind of Neptunian kind of mask over the relationship with the father, kind of an interesting aspect. So yeah, the south node has just moved into orb with the sun. South node, again, right at 13, and his sun is at 10, so that's a 10-degree orb, so it's conjunct. So we're going to see, I believe, Justin Trudeau wind up leaving office, and probably, I would say, by the end of the year, maybe the first of the year, with that south node on his sun. Critical moment for him. Very, very, very critical moment. Neptune, he's got Jupiter. Look, he's got Jupiter in Sagittarius. He's got Venus in Aquarius. He's got his true node in Aquarius. He's got Mercury. He's like out there. And all the Sagittarian stuff, to me, has to do with other cultures and putting on masks and putting on fake. I mean, he went to India with his family, and he's like doing Bollywood shit. The family's doing a Bollywood movie or their own version of it. He loves this stuff. It's kind of in his chart, and maybe to his detriment, quite honestly. He's got a Mars square to Jupiter, right? Is that right? No, what's Mars doing? Mars square to Jupiter. Yeah, he's got a Mars-Jupiter square. He's got Mars right at the end of Pisces. Oh my God, that's sacrificial. That's really sacrificial. He's got that Mars-Jupiter square, Mars and Pisces. That's what likes to dress up. It's a Pisces thing. I think he's done. I think he's done. It's that South Node coming in, and it's going to wipe out his sun. And life is not fun and games now for Justin Trudeau with Saturn transiting his 5th house. And she kind of feels sorry for the guy in some ways. You know, he didn't ask to be the bastard son of Fidel Castro and a kooky mom. But he had a pretty privileged life. You know, as Pierre Trudeau's son, he got whatever he wanted. Went to the best schools, got the best social Marxist indoctrination that he could. But I think he's done. He's odd. He's an oddball. He's got the True Node in Aquarius and Venus in Aquarius. Sextile Neptune. Are you kidding me? He's an oddball. He should have been an actor. Sun in the 5th house. That's Leo's house. Justin, get out of government and go to India. Go become a Bollywood star. He should have been an actor. Sun in the 5th house. The Saturn thing, of course, Saturn being uber responsible with the midheaven. You know, I guess part of his deal is he had to live out this Saturn. But Saturn's also in opposition to Neptune in his chart. So Neptune just drains all that Saturn. It's like flushing a toilet. Right down the drain. And he's got the inconjunct with Sun and Saturn. Look at that. You know, again, that could be part of the mystery with the birth of the father with Castro. But Saturn up in the 10th house is so responsible, right? You got to be responsible. In Gemini, it's like, can I do 2 things? Can I be an actor? And can I be the prime minister too? Well, sure, Justin, you can pretend to be the prime minister because that's acting anyway. Oh, okay. But just lay off the Aladdin facials. He's done. He is D-O-N-E. And Neptune, he's got Jupiter 21, so Neptune is in square with his own natal Jupiter. And that's, again, right? He's getting nailed. He's getting nailed for being multi-culty. That's what's happening. Again, I'm not here to I'm just, look, he's somebody who's being raked through the coals now by the same people that propped him up. That's what's going on. And I'm sure people on the right, they'll like this as well. Oh, look at that. The lefty just love Justin Trudeau. He's their favorite. He's such a great leader. Why can't we have somebody like him? If we could only have somebody like him. Well, Pete Buttigieg he's a Capricorn, but you know, he's not. Pete Buttigieg is you'll never see any pictures of that guy in blackface. That is one controlled mofo right there. Yeah, I'm sure the right is having a little schadenfreude on the Justin Trudeau side. Anyway, it's again a weird kind of cognitive dissonant relationship with diversity. Because really, that's not what diversity is about. If you're the left, you just come and say, hey, we celebrate this guy. We celebrate. He may be, you know, a little, he may have been uninformed. He may have been guileless. But he was really getting into that culture. Like, he was committed, right? He was committed. I've seen pictures of people from that party. They were not as committed as he was. Like, that's commitment. That is told, he's all in. Wouldn't you like want to celebrate somebody like that on some level? Just all in? Oh no, can't do that. Front page of the Burning Spear. Justin Trudeau, I'm sorry, your political career is about to go down in flames. And that's what, unless he does some weird mea culpa, but he does it all the time anyway. I mean, didn't he do like a 5-hour apology speech to all the gay, lesbian, and transgender people of Canada? I think he did something like that. He apologized. He's apologized for everything. I think he's out of apologies. You can apologize for his behavior, but sometimes when you apologize too much, there's just nothing left in the apology. It's just yeah, right? It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think he's done. That South Node hits his son. He's done. He'll say, you know what, I'm gonna bail out. I'm gonna let somebody who really understands this. I'm gonna let a grown up in the room for a while. I don't think he's not a grown up, but he does feel like a bit of a puer to me. Okay, let me check in with you guys and see what's happening. The cult of personality. That's what got Justin in. His bloodline got Justin in. It's his bloodline. Apparently, he's Fidel Castro's illegitimate son. Apparently. But we got a little chat about the Area 51 festival. Isn't that interesting that this Area 51 festival is happening at the same time that the former, I guess Blink-187. Interesting. Okay. Blink-187, Tom DeLonge, the guy who's from Blink-187, it's like he's been appointed to be the spokesperson for disclosure. That's what it feels like to me. I'm sure David Wilcock is pissed. I think that's why David Wilcock started taking up the guitar and playing again. He's like, man, if I could just start a band and be like Tom DeLonge and Blink-187, maybe, just maybe, they'll like, tap me on the shoulders. David, you're the guy. You're the guy that's really going to be the Hermes Trismegistus of disclosure. And that didn't happen. So now they got this Tom DeLonge guy. He's the guy that got the video. It's everywhere now. And it's the Navy that said, oh yeah, these things are real. They're real. We don't know what the hell they are, but they're real. So he's the messenger of disclosure. And guess what? We got the Area 51 festival happening right at the same time. Isn't that interesting timing? Very interesting timing. Next week, the Monday Night Football, they always have these musical guests. And the car, it's a Genesis. I don't know, is that a Jag or something? I don't know what a Genesis is. It's an interesting name for a car, though. So every Monday night, they have this kind of monochromatic, black and white halftime entertainment brought to you by Genesis. And every single Monday night I've watched this thing, they've got some hip hop person I've never heard of. Well, maybe that's not true. I did see Ciara one night. She did some kind of militaristic dance thing. And she's Russell Wilson's wife. I have heard of her. Everybody else, I don't know who these people are. I don't really care to know. It's okay. It's not my thing. I get it. But they're breaking with tradition. This coming Monday night, next Monday night game, Blink-182 is going to be on halftime at Monday night. Isn't that interesting? Timing is everything. It's everything. So you got the band, you got Tom DeLonge, you got the disclosure thing, you've got the Area 51 festival, and of course, apparently there's some kind of like thing with David Wilcock and that whole crew and their event that they're doing. And of course, that's going to be the buzz. Too bad David didn't start that band earlier. David needs more tattoos too. I think Tom DeLonge's got tattoos. David's just not hip enough. I'm not even sure Tom DeLonge is. I mean, Blink-182 is so 2003. That was, 16 years ago. 16 years ago. But they do have Travis Barker in the band, who's a hell of a drummer. And a survivor as well. Okay, what do we have here? More lame music. The Area 51 event is a clown carnival. How in the world do we stop geoengineering on top of the perpetual logging, clear-cutting operations of both boreal and tropical forests? It is not only rainforests, Canada's boreal is threatened. Some reason I don't trust Corey. Are you talking about Corey Good? for some reason. How about for about 100 reasons? Let's see, what is Cato? So California Penal Code for murder, 182. Is that it? Interesting. David went to New Paltz. Isn't that New York? Isn't New Paltz in New York? I think so. The January eclipse, Saturn squares Trudeau's moon, I think. Yes. Yes. And well, that all that eclipse energy is going to be in his 5th house. I think he's going to move to India, become a Bollywood actor. That's what I think he wants to be. That's what he wants to be. Right? All that stuff. Let him do it. India calls, Justin. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about a different version of diversity because I want to set this up and play this interview with my buddy Steven. So I lived in the Bay Area for a very long time. Moved there when I was 5 years old, and went to public schools there. The first 3 years of public schools were really interesting to me. Well, for me, it was all white kids. That's all I knew. A couple of Japanese kids smattered in there, and so my connection with people of color that didn't really kick into gear until we moved, and that happened when I was in the 4th grade. And we moved to San Jose, which at that time was probably one of the nation's great melting pots, because there was already kind of a native culture there in San Jose. It was San Jose before Silicon Valley was there, was a huge agricultural region. When I moved there were orchards everywhere. There were apricot orchards and walnut orchards and strawberry fields. I mean, this place was happening. They were all over the place. So, if you look at the cultures that were kind of involved in that agricultural world, that ag world, it was primarily Japanese, Portuguese, and Hispanic, right? Those were and they were already there, and they'd been there for a while because they were working the land, working the fields. They owned land. That was their thing. So I was immediately brought into an area where it was very different than the place that I had spent the first 3 years of my life. Then there was also this kind of, move with, I would call it low-cost housing, but lower. It was like you could get in and buy a house. And so, again, it became sort of this middle-class kind of rush land grab. And there were a lot of different families and from a lot of different cultures or so-called ethnicities that took advantage of that. So, we had, so-called black kids. And I remember I got into a fight with a kid named Kishan Singh, right? I got into a fight with like an Indian kid when I was in the 5th grade, okay? I got into a lot of fights when I was young. I didn't always do well, by the way. It wasn't like I was some ass kicker. I held my own in some, and others like, okay. But I got into a fight one time. It was like the first fight I got into at school there. And it was with this black kid, Robert Wright. And I don't know what we were jawing at each other about. But we got into it. And next thing you know, we're throwing blows. And we got sent to the principal's office. And, the principals back then were much different than they are today. And he said, well, why did you guys fight? I don't think we had a really good answer. He said this, he said this. And he said, well, why don't you guys just shake hands and, be friends. So we did. Guess what? We became best friends. We became best buddies. We used to ride our bikes around together. I love this guy, Robert Wright. He was such a cool kid. And I have this story, which I've told before, and you've heard it, pardon me. I don't want to sound like Pete Carroll, but it's a great story. And we sat together in Mr. Beaumont's math class. Mr. Beaumont was a big bad dude. He was a big dude. And we used to do stuff like we used to put pencils on our noses, kind of like they were mustaches. He hated that shit. And he would take the pencils, he'd wrap them across your knuckles. He was old school, man. So anyway, it was these desks. you would sit two to a desk. And instead of the desk moving up, they had cubbies in the front with a divider, right? So one day, so I'd have my cubby, and then Robert Wright had his cubby. So one day, Robert Wright brings in a package of unsweetened Kool-Aid, and he puts it on the inside of his cubby, and he does this for the entire class. And he's like, "You want some?" I'm like, "Man, I'm all in on this. I'm all in on the unsweetened Kool-Aid because we're breaking some rules here, man. This is great." And I don't give a shit if it's just, unflavored ascorbic acid. It was all the more sweeter that we were doing this, and big Mr. Beaumont didn't know, right? So, we're having this moment. It's one of my favorite memories of growing up. And being this guy that I'd gotten into this fight with, and now we're kind of doing something that I wouldn't advocate today. It's like, yeah, it's another person. Yeah, there's, but who knows? Our germs, our immunity was being strengthened by the experience. But so that was my kind of indoctrination into diversity. I grew up in a very diverse area, and we all hung out with each other. As we got older, we would, do things that would kind of alter our chemistry together, and, play basketball together and all that stuff. I've got fond memories growing up during that time. A lot of fond memories. It was great. So growing up in the Bay Area, diversity was a very, very different deal. And we didn't even call it diversity. We just called it getting along, hanging out. There wasn't this weird kind of social stigma. You're this, I'm this. It just didn't happen. We just, if you were cool, you were cool. It was just the way it was. And it was across the board. I had friends of all these various stripes. And that continued to be part of the Bay Area experience. And it became a real melting pot because all these cultures would show up in the Bay Area. And we had great food, fantastic food. You get anything. And people were pretty respectful, to be honest with you. Everybody kind of got along. And so that gets into the musical world. And there was this incredible fusion and synthesis of all these different musical styles that were happening in the Bay Area. And there were people who were responsible for bringing a lot of that kind of culture and music. There's a guy named Chebby Sabah. And Cheb was Algerian. And he had been part of the Living Theater in New York City. Very interesting theater troops. He was a very theatrical guy. His name was Serge. And he came out of this whole kind of interesting sort of New York scene that Steve and Chris are familiar with Hakeem Bey. And the connections with Morocco. And so Cheb was a DJ Chebby Sabah. And he brought all these people. He brought rye music to the Bay Area. There was all kinds of really interesting collaborations. And he was just one guy. And there was this interesting fusion and synthesis of music and styles. I'll never forget when I saw Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan in Oakland. It was incredible. Don Cherry was there, the jazz musician. People were dancing ecstatically on the stage. Jai Uttal it was great. We're talking about Jai Uttal and the Pagan Love Orchestra. In that group, Jai Uttal is Jewish, right? He's one of these guys that, is part of that whole Das scene. Krishna Das, that whole scene. Jai Uttal is part of it. You had Jeffrey Gordon in that band. Jeffrey is Jewish. Kit Walker, I believe is a Scottish name. Is that right? It was just completely Will Bernard. I mean, it was like this polyglot of players, styles, sounds. And that was like one of the great things about growing up in the Bay Area and evolving and following the music scene. And Stephen Kent is another one of these pivotal people that has been an intersector with a lot of different people, a lot of different groups, a lot of different styles. It was through Stephen that I got connected into the sort of Tuvan throat singing world, because there's a guy there who had a group that Churgilchin, who I got to know their group. Again, this is the Bay Area. You bring these Tuvan throat singers over. Stephen would perform with them. Tremendous stuff. So what I'm trying to share with you is that there is a place for a creative mix of cultures when they come together. But it happens when it's an organic mix and nobody's forcing things together. And everybody is accepted in that mix. And not everybody's accepted with the exclusion of one group so that they can define their specialness against another group. That doesn't fly. I'm equally embrace people to be able to live their own lives in their own communities amongst their own people. If you want to do that, fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. Right? People shouldn't be penalized for that. Unless, of course, it's Minnesota, in which case it's a different discussion. Anyway, what I'm trying to share with you is that there was a very organic, vibrant, thriving musical, cultural scene, a fusion, a synthesis. But it wasn't forced, it wasn't regulated, it wasn't part of some fucking social movement or kind of, social justice talking point. It just was. It just was. And music was the common denominator that brought it all together. And Stephen is one of these guys, he's a minstrel, whether it's working, I remember he brought these two didgeridoo players over from Australia. He treated them like they were his own family. I hung out with them, hung out with those guys. They were interesting characters, for sure. Terrible diets, really bad diets. Anyway, but he's done so much for so many people across this spectrum of performers. And really, that's really, I think, in some ways the way it should be. All right, so let me stop talking. Let me play this interview. It's me and Stephen Kent. We recorded this yesterday. You'll get a sense of him. Maybe at the end, I'll find something of his online, and we'll play some music of his to kind of send things out. All right, thanks. And here's me and Stephen Kent. Let me cue this thing up. And get her done. Like I said, he's going to be performing tonight at the East West Bookstore in Palo Alto. Okay. So I can make this thing bigger if I can. All right, let's get into share screen mode and let's see where this takes us. I'm with my good friend, my old buddy, Stephen Kent, whom I've known since, I think, 1994. So, Stephen, where are we now in terms of our decades? Are we like in 30 years?
Well,
25 years, right? 25 years?
25 years at least. I think it might have been 93, but maybe it was 94. Yeah.
So Stephen is going to be joining us here in the Hill Country. I'm totally psyched about this. It's going to be October 12th. Specifically, that's the night Stephen's going to be playing. We're going to be playing at the Gillespie County Cultural Center, or he's going to be playing at the Gillespie County Cultural Center here in Fredericksburg, which is it's a great old church. It's kind of big and kind of ambient. So some of you who are familiar with some of Stephen's more ambient work, I'm sure he's going to feel out the space and kind of get into that a little bit. But it's going to be a really small, intimate gathering with a group of people that are going to be hanging out here in the Hill Country for that weekend with me. Steve's going to be a little bit of a part of that night and the following day. And I'm going to have a few tickets kind of on the side for people in the Hill Country to come check out and see what Stephen does. So that's kind of the headline item here. And by the way, we're going to be looking into streaming the event as well. So people who love Stephen or want to go but can't attend, I'll have more details on that later. So that's the headline item. And part of the reason why we're sitting here talking together today, but also just to catch up since you and I are good old friends. And Stephen, how's it going?
Oh, it's good. It's a beautiful day here in the Bay Area, San Francisco area.
Yeah. So you're based out of Fairfax now, is that right?
Yeah, just in the foothills of Mount Tam, or at the foot of Mount Tam. Yeah.
If everybody's been to that part of California, it's a really magical part of the world. And being in such close proximity to Mount Tam, I think, has something to do with that.
Definitely. It's beautiful. I'm sitting here with hummingbirds flying back and forth, and a whole murder of crows just passed through about 20 minutes ago.
A murder of crows. I love that. That's such a great.
That's the collective noun for crows.
Yeah. Hey, do you ever take your ditches up on the mountain and just play? That's a question.
Good question. Yeah. I don't. I mean, it's, I guess I could, but I like to go places where I just walk. And to go really up on the mountain, I would be having to drive. So I hike a lot around here, but actually, I don't think I've ever, since in the last couple of years I've lived here, gone out with a didgeridoo in that way.
Well, if I still lived there, I would get you out of your place just before dawn, and I would drive you to the top of Mount Tam. And I would somehow convince you to do kind of a didgeridoo sunrise service one of these days. So you're going to get back to California. I might hold you to that.
You're on, just before dawn.
Just before dawn. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're on.
So let's go back in time and just kind of the personal connection here. I met Stephen, I think around 1993, 94, and I was working at a really bizarre, kind of obscure record distribution company and in San Francisco, and this CD crossed my path. And at that time, I was really into the kind of this ethno-ambient sound, where, indigenous instruments and indigenous musical styles were kind of being married up with electronics in a very kind of nascent, very new kind of fashion. It was really exciting, unique. And I find this CD called Lights in a Fat City. And I listen to it and I say, holy shit, this is one of the best things I've ever heard. Who are these guys? Where do they come from? And it turns out that Stephen, of course, was part of Lights in a Fat City. And the disc is somewhere, right? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
That's it. In fact, if you could give me 5 seconds.
And it turns out that
the LP cover, which is sitting right across.
You got 5 seconds. Go get it. Stephen, of course, was part of Lights in. There it is. I shit you not. This is probably one of the top 100 records of all time because of where the band was at and what they were doing. There was tape recordings. There was Eddie Sayer's production, which I thought at that time was brilliant. Stephen's didgeridoo. Talk a little bit about this record, Stephen.
Well, actually,
So I've been told that there's some issue with the video, and that's unfortunate because I just see my face and I'm just frozen on the screen. And okay, now I'm seeing myself again. Now I'm talking. Okay, now Stephen's there. Okay, so I'm gonna try to launch this again. I apologize that something happened with the transmission. Let me ramp it up again, and let's get back into the interview. Here we go.
On the cover here, you can see a very young Stephen Kent. And then Eddie is obscured underneath this pile of blankets and a bamboo hat on the cover. But it was a trio. We always included Simon Tassano as a member of the group, so the sound engineer was an integral part of the overall sound and the band itself. Although Eddie and I began busking on the streets and in the markets of North London, basically. Camden Market was where we started Lights in a Fat City as a Saturday morning thing. We'd go and hang out and play on a magic carpet given to us by the Afghan carpet salesman there in the market. And that was like early mid-80s. It would be 84 we started, but the album we recorded in late 87. And that was the beginning of the global presence of Lights in a Fat City.
Well, big apologies to Simon. I knew he was there, and I spaced out on it. And Simon is an incredibly talented producer and engineer who has a very unique kind of signature sound. So, yeah, big ups to Simon there. So, you talk a little bit about the record and just kind of how revolutionary it was for that time.
Well, it was before there was such a thing in the global marketplace as world music, I think, because this was a bunch of white guys with various stories who'd arrived in London. We're all British, and we each had our story of getting there with our particular instruments. But really and truly, this was the first global release of contemporary didgeridoo music, which was not referential in any way to the traditional music of Aboriginal people, although it was always been vital for me to credit and make a distinction and honor the source of the didgeridoo with what I do. For me, my connection to the Aboriginal people of Australia and to the land in Australia was really what brought me into becoming a didgeridoo player, and I couldn't have done it without having been there and gone on that voyage.
So, no, go ahead, keep going. I'll just keep going.
Well, I was going to say there was in Australia, and he's still going strong, Charlie McMahon, otherwise known as Charlie Hook, who was also playing and had a band called Gondwanaland, and he preempted me by several years in the world of being a didgeridoo player. But more, I think, I'm not sure if he at that time had worked outside of Australia, though he may have done a little. And then Michael Harner in the USA was working in his shamanic studies with a didgeridoo player called Steve McDonald, who curiously I came across when living and working in Melbourne, as he was giving deep tissue massages. And I was infused by the massages of this guy who was working with, it turned out was working with Michael Harner. And I, at that point, was not a serious didgeridoo player. So I feel like in some way I had the transmission on multi-levels of the didgeridoo into my being before I really became a serious player.
Yeah, it almost seems really destined in some ways, and how all these events kind of lined up for you to connect with that part of the world and the instruments and the people that were associated with it from a very, very long time ago. Like, you know, we're talking about an ancient group of people and even the contemporary influences. Now, you were there in Australia hanging out with a circus troupe, but not a new not a circus with animals, but like new vaudeville, right? Circus Oz. And that's how you basically got to Australia, right?
Yeah, well, Circus Oz is Australia's national contemporary circus, and was really like the Pickle Family Circus in the USA and California, and Cirque du Soleil, who were also starting up around the same time, late 70s, beginning of the 80s, as a group. This is way before Cirque du Soleil was more than one actual company and became a franchise or a global franchise. Circus Oz has maintained itself based in Melbourne as Australia's number one standard bearer of contemporary circus, and is also a very politicized group of people. The group was founded on principles of collectivism and examining political issues such as in Australia sexual politics back in the 70s and into the 80s, which was when I joined. And to this day, Circus Oz continues to break taboos and boundaries around the roles of women in performance and in society as well, for example. And then the other major political thrust of the group was to support Aboriginal human rights and land rights in particular in Australia. So I joined, having met the group with my own band touring in Europe. My band at that point was called Furious Pig. And Furious Pig coincided in Europe with Circus Oz, who a love affair began between us and the circus, but specifically in my case with one of the trapeze artists in the group, Sue Broadway. And they invited me, the upshot of it was that they invited me to come back to Australia with them as their music director. So I started working in Australia and flew out to Australia to work with Circus Oz beginning in August 1981. And the rest evolved.
It just unfolded from there. One of the things that was one of your calling cards in Circus Oz was Suitcase Man. And you've told me that.
No, that was later, but Suitcase Man. Oh,
so that wasn't Circus Oz. You didn't do Suitcase Man there?
No, in Circus Oz, I was primarily the music director of a group with, there was about 15 performers, and I was in the ring working as a musician and involved as well, because Circus Oz was a collective where everyone participated in all aspects of the work, from banging in the huge, great iron tent pegs into the ground to being in the ring, to driving trucks. Something of a juggler and an acrobat and a clown, a comedic side of me also evolved during my work with Circus Oz. I left Circus Oz after my travels deep into the bush in Australia, where I connected with Aboriginal communities and where I really became serious about the didgeridoo. However, on my return to Europe after travels through Asia, Sue Broadway followed me about 6 months later, and we began a new group with a four-person new circus group called Ra Ra Zoo. And it was in Ra Ra Zoo that I was presented. I can only say I was presented with an opportunity to do something with a suitcase, and it became a defining part of my life, that I would on stage pretty much every night get locked up, fully clothed into chained and locked in a pretty small suitcase, and would escape, of course, from the chains, but also from all of my clothes bar a little pink sequin G-string. This was just to clarify this, you would be getting into an argument with somebody, right? This was the whole setup, right? And then they'd force you into the suitcase, and then you would somehow manage to disrobe inside the suitcase. I was in a fetal position, so I was thrust mercilessly into the suitcase against my will, where I was also chained, locked up. Of course, it was kind of surreal because I had directed this happening in the first place on stage. But then, yes, I'd be in a fetal position inside this really, really crunched up suitcase, an old brown leather suitcase. And yeah, I would talk to the audience, do a kind of comedy routine from within the suitcase while left alone on stage, while taking my clothes off, which was quite a feat, actually, because I had a shirt and tie and dress pants, like tucks. I didn't have a jacket, but I would get everything except down to my skimpy underwear. Then I'd burst out of the suitcase and do triumphant muscle poses. And I was quite skinny, so I wasn't an effective muscle poser. The whole thing was ridiculous.
Well, I think that kind of probably added to the hilarity. That is such an amazing story. That's some Harry Houdini shit, man. That's like great. That's totally great.
Yeah, and like I said, it defined my life. All anyone wanted to talk to me about for 4 or 5 years was, how do you do the suitcase? I just was like, I felt like my life was about being shut in a box.
Right.
But at the same time, I was evolving as a musician, as a didgeridoo player, and that during that time was where Lights in a Fat City began, and that's where the journey. Eventually, I morphed myself out of the circus world, away from the suitcase, and went full time back into music with the didgeridoo now as my primary artery.
So you went through a total transformation in Australia. You've got a musical background. You came from a musical family. Obviously, you were in a band. You went through an incredible transformation in Australia where you get connected with the Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal people. You get the didgeridoo, you get some hands-on instruction, very respectful, and then literally you emerge from Australia like another kind of a suitcase and go back to your life in England, and now you're off on this path. It's an incredible story, absolutely incredible.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it was like coming home, Australia. And one thing that we've left out of the conversation so far is that though I wasn't born in Africa, when I was a very small baby, when I was just a few months old, my family relocated to East Africa. And I spent my formative 7 years living in Uganda, where my father was working in the university art department at the University of Makerere. And his job, it was a new course, a new part of the Western style, English style university in Kampala, his brief was to bring cultural elements of the tribal areas surrounding Uganda and that part, East Africa, into the course that he was teaching. So my childhood was spent a lot of the time traveling around with my father, with my family, visiting communities in villages and learning. He was learning about their cultures. I was being a kid. So this was the beginning of my life. And when I came finally at 7 to live back in Britain, I was a foreigner there. And it was cold. It was winter. They had horrible, itchy, like
wool clothes.
Underwear.
Yeah.
And it was wet, and it was just, I was appalled by it. It was a huge transition again. So when I had the opportunity to go to Australia, I had no preconception when I went that its effect on me viscerally was going to be going to live in a large landmass in the southern hemisphere, a large and very dry continent, was going to echo my African experiences so greatly. The smells, there was an energy in Australia which instantly put me back into my own roots. And the didgeridoo, when I first really got the didgeridoo, because at first when I heard didgeridoo, I thought it was the most uninteresting instrument in the world. I was like, what? This is not interesting. I just heard poor recordings of it for sure. But when I first heard it, what inspired me was a connection to Africa. And I heard music from Africa, and especially from East Africa, and the area that I lived in as a child, which was similar to didgeridoo music, but normally played with a whole group of people playing horns without the circular breathing that makes the didgeridoo a continuous sound. So I plugged into the didgeridoo as a way to connect with my own African roots rather than necessarily about Australia and about the Aboriginal people. So for me, the didgeridoo has become the voicing of my own story. I'm not playing Aboriginal music. People assume, and in fact, in this day and age, there's a movement globally of contemporary musicians playing the didgeridoo. Thousands of people in Europe, all over the world now, Japan, Germany, France, these are big hubs of didgeridoo activity. And the USA as well. It's got sizable communities here. But I was interested, a lot of those people say, oh, we like your styles, we like the traditional style. So they hear my playing and they consider it to be traditional because there are all kinds of elements of contemporary didgeridoo music that have been influenced far more by electronica and by techno music and dance music and beatboxing than they have by the traditions of Australia and the way that Aboriginal people play the didgeridoo. However, there's nothing very traditional about the way that I play. It's really not a traditional sound at all, what I do. I couldn't be, in many ways, qualitatively further from playing Aboriginal traditional music than the beatboxers. It's an utterly contemporary form that somehow I have been able to embody since the beginning of my encounter with the didgeridoo, when I first began to really understand how to play it, which came during my journeys into Central Australia and into the most profound and profoundly moving land and landscape, and the story of the people that have been the custodians of that land for so long. So that was my awakening into myself, really, going to Australia. And I hadn't got that in all of my upbringing in Britain and Europe as a musician, learning many instruments. And the didgeridoo somehow plugged me in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an incredible story. And, you know, I hope that one day, if you have the time and the energy, that you could actually write a book, because with all of your travels and the people that you've worked with, and just some of the anecdotal stuff that goes along with it, you would have a remarkable book. And
well, thank you.
Really cool.
It's the tide is coming in on that idea. I feel like I've been flirting with it. It's been floating around my consciousness for quite a long time now, not quite a few years, where I've been encouraged by people to do such a thing. And, you know, there's part of me which is, well, why? Who would be interested in my story? But I said this to my daughter.
Yeah.
I said it to my daughter a year ago. I think I was just mentioning the concept to her, and my ambivalence, if you like, about, well, why would anybody be interested? I'm not looking for compliments. I'm just, honestly, on that, there's a certain crisis of confidence in myself around that conceptually. But my daughter, Stella, she goes, you know, Papa, I would read that book. And so I thought, well, if there was one person in the world who I was going to write that for, it would be her. One of the regrets that I have, and I'm sure many people do, here we live in this great time of technological advancement where every child who's born in the Western world, and way beyond too, has their entire life mapped out and recorded in photos and videos and whatever, all kinds of things. Whereas when I was growing up, yes, of course, there were photos and there was film, but very little. It wasn't like anything like this experience we're all living now.
Yeah.
And so I regret that I have no real access to my ancestors' stories. And here we are in a place where I could make some sort of statement in that regard, at least, if only for my own child. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I totally agree. And, you know, being as close to you as I've been over the years and seeing kind of where you've moved and where the Didge is taking you, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff culturally that is part of your story as well. Like, for instance, the whole alien Dreamtime thing that you did with Jonah Sharp and Terence McKenna, right? So this is when Terence McKenna is really starting to hit his groove. He's hanging out in Petaluma, right? That's where he was living at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
He's living in Petaluma and in this area.
So McKenna is hot. He's really hot. Jonah Sharp, who is Alien Dreamtime, Space-Time Continuum, he decides that he wants to put this event together where it's...
Well, actually, no. Again, Robert, I've got to talk to you about this, because you've got the story wrong, and it's very important you get it right.
All right, hit me.
It wasn't Jonah Sharp's concept. It was Ken Adams and Britt Welling.
It was Ken who did the video. Yeah.
They were called Rosex Media House. They were big friends of Terence. They were living with Terence. They were spending a lot of time with him. Ken and Britt, both filmmakers, video makers, who for a long time were based in Austin, Texas. They conceptualized the whole of the Alien Dreamtime project and asked Jonah to be part of it as well as myself. It was they who put this together. It was Jonah Sharp was brought in. And then there was something, unfortunately, as is so often the case in the world of music and showbiz, there was something of a coup that occurred where the event was recorded and released, remixed, reactualized, and released as an album on Caroline Records. Caroline Records.
It was Astral Works. You know, and I apologize. I knew that Ken was.
But that was just to say that the stories get retold and then the truth changes, and that's happened in so many forms. But really, this would not have happened, although the end result on the CD Astral Works had myself as a small time player in the overall story that was presented of Terence McKenna and Space Time Continuum, where it was actually a reverse and upside down projection, because it was Rosette and Ken Adams and Britt Wellin who founded that project, brought me in with Jonah, and with obviously Terence was the focus of the whole thing. But the history now looks at it differently. And
that's why you need to write the book, Stephen, right? Because really, you know, again, apologies to Ken. I knew Ken was deeply involved with that. And there was also a video that they did, as well as the CD that came out on Astral Works. So, but Jonah kind of hijacked the whole thing. I mean, that's why in my head, I thought, okay, well, this was his idea. But of course, it was Ken and Rosex that were really putting that thing together. And I was there for that event. And I thought it was amazing. I mean, I thought it was really amazing. And what happened was that Jonah kind of sampled you in and out of the actual mix altogether. But still, it speaks to a time in California, right, where this whole kind of cyberdelic thing was happening.
Yeah, but it was really, I mean, it was extraordinary. One of the things about that was so bizarre to me, it was an extraordinary event and ran 2 nights in Southwood Market in a theater, the Transmission Theater down in downtown San Francisco. And it ran 2 nights, I guess a Friday and a Saturday, I'm not sure. It was very early 2003, like February 2003. It was right after I want to say it was very soon after the Rodney King riot.
Right.
But there had also been there was a new mayor in San Francisco who was the ex-police chief of San Francisco, Jordan, Frank Jordan.
Yeah, Frank Jordan.
And then he appointed one of his main liberal Democrat opponents in the race for mayor, Richard Hongisto.
Dick Hongisto. I got a great Dick Hongisto story, but go ahead.
So he was the new police chief in San Francisco. This was the beginning of 93. And what did they do? They had this event happening in San Francisco, of all places, in the nightclub district of San Francisco, with Terence McKenna doing his spiel. The second night, the cops came in and shut the whole thing down. Luckily, it had pretty much run its course by the time they got there. But it was a point being made of control from in this most liberal of cities in the USA. It was extraordinary. It was bizarre.
Yeah, Willie Brown did that later on as well. And if you get into like around 1998, 1999, Willie Brown started to shut down all the parties, all the rave events. It was because the nightclub owners were complaining, and he was listening to them because they have money. And next thing you know, that whole scene was just being flushed down the toilet. So again, to your point, liberal city, liberal mayor. At the end of the day, it didn't really matter. But that night, the first night, I was there for the first night, and it was remarkable. And again, it's one of those touch points in your life with that culture and what was happening in San Francisco at that time that I think is really, really interesting. So you and I met just, I think before that, it was 1993. And I'd gotten summarily released from that bizarre job that I had, which was kind of interesting. When that's where I found Lights in a Fat City. And then I ultimately found you because you had moved to the Bay Area and you were connecting up with what would ultimately become the City of Tribes People. And you were living in Oakland. I was living in Oakland, and we were living very close together, not far, like maybe about 3 or 4 miles from one another, actually.
Yeah, but not even. I was just you were off Park Boulevard, and so was I, just a mile up the hill too, maybe.
Let's just say I was in a different part of Park Boulevard. Stephen
it was slightly different.
Yeah, it was pretty real. So anyway, I got your number. I don't know how I got your number, but I got your number, and I was doing this distribution business and selling, kind of electronic and ambient and ethno stuff. And I'm like, hey, would you like to do something? And you said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Let's, we talked and we kind of got on. And I'd gotten this table space at this festival, this folk festival.
Full festival in Davis.
In Davis, right? Yeah. And let's just say that I wasn't all that together at that point in my life.
I was waiting for you to arrive to leave. It was hours later before we just left.
Yeah, so let's just say I wasn't all that together. So anyway, I show up to Stephen's door, and this is the first time we've met, right? First time you and I physically met during that time, and I was looking very different back then. I had a very different kind of vibe. I think I was wearing a black leather jacket that day. You remember that? I think I was like.
Robert, I can't remember your sartorial elegance. You always look so good.
So I was in a very different kind of space. Let's put it that way. So I
had hair down to way down my back.
Yeah, I think both of us have gone through some considerable changes in terms of our appearance. Yes. So we jet up to Davis, and I've got this spot, and we kind of get there even late in the day, right? So I totally do not have my shit together at all. But we get there, and I'm there to sell CDs, and they got a big stage. And I'm like, I got to get Stephen up on that stage. So I go to the guy who's scheduling people. I said, look, I got this guy. He's a didgeridoo player. He's one of the best in the world. If you have any time left over at the end, you got to get him up there. So he said, yes. He got you on the stage, and you went up there and you started playing. And you're great, obviously. And then this one guy who is in the audience, and he's drunk as shit, starts yelling at Stephen, and he says, "You suck! You suck!" And Stephen, perfect timing, that cool, dry kind of, English retort, says, "No, actually, I blow." And then you went on to talk about the didgeridoo. And you turned that moment, it was magical, right? You turned that moment into a guy who's completely heckling you. You made it instructional, educational, and then by the end, the guy's loving you, right? And then you said, hey, come on over. We got this table. All of a sudden, all these people come running over, and they bought a bunch of your stuff, which was, ultimately at the end of the day, kind of a cool thing, right?
Yeah, I'm still doing it. It's what I do.
Yeah, right.
Probably the same thing. I learned a lot being in the circus, honestly. 7 years I worked in circus, and during that time, I became far more of a comic performer than I was a musician in my public zone. And I just learned a huge amount about falling flat on your face and getting up again in public. It's like doing a pratfall and then continuing and dealing with it and turning it around is the way in which the circus taught me to perform. And I've been able to bring that back into my music and educational work and with the didgeridoo. It's saved me many times. And in some ways, it draws me closer to my audience for sure.
Yeah. You got an earthquake going on there because your monitor is sort of jumping around.
Oh, that's me, my legs shaking with excitement.
I think they have drugs for that, for what is it, the shaky leg syndrome or something like that? I've seen the commercials on TV. You've played with a ton of people. I mean, my God, you opened for the Dalai Lama, and I was there for that. That was really interesting on a number of different levels. And you've been in the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Turin. You played with. Name some of the people that are of note that you played with.
Well, I mean, for me, it's been really. My journey with the didgeridoo, as I said before, it's like I don't really feel that my expression with the didgeridoo is an Australian expression.
Right.
And I don't hear what I do as Australian music. I kind of find myself falling down because a lot of people project that simply because it's didgeridoo, it must be Australian. It's like 500 years ago, someone might have said of the violin, oh, they're playing violin on the streets of Europe, but they're playing Chinese music, because I think the origins of the violin are in China. But I'm doing something different with the didgeridoo. and I brought it into collaborations with musicians from so many different cultural types and musical genres. I was fortunate enough to play with Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock on one occasion, which was extraordinary. John Densmore, the drummer of the Doors, called me up and left a message on my phone one day. He's like, "Hi, it's John Densmore of the Doors," and I'm like, "Wow!" One of my, I as a young teenager, I was so into the Doors. I still love the Doors music, so it was just being called up by one of my idols. I played with one of Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band's guitarists long ago, and he again was one of my all-time heroes. I've worked with tube and throat singers of extraordinary caliber, Chia Giltin, Ayrton Moreira, the great Brazilian percussionist who himself played. He kind of invented the notion of percussion in fusion music in the early days, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Ayrton, I've been lucky to play with Zakir Hussain, Glenn Velez, our Carlos Nakai, and I put a band together with some Mongolian musicians and toured a few years ago. I don't know, many people all over the world I've played with, and it's been an extraordinary journey. Yeah, I continue to hopefully open doors and be invited into such collaborations.
Well, we can't leave Paul Horn out of the mix either.
Oh, well, I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to leave him out. Robert produced a great show at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, where there's a replica of the labyrinth from the church of the cathedral in Chartres in France. And that was a Paul Horn show, and I got to be opening the event and perform together with Paul at the end as well, yeah.
It was a pretty incredible night in a lot of ways. So
it was a great night. It was a historic moment.
Yeah. And then the one collaboration that I saw with you that not a lot of people saw, maybe a few have heard, was when you brought Paul Pena into KPFA. And you had him on, and you guys actually did something live. And I was there. I watched it. You said, "Hey, come on down. Paul's going to be in the studio." Stephen, to this day, I get chills, going down my spine when I think about that performance in the studio.
Wow, somewhere I must have a recording of that, I imagine. You remind me of something I didn't have a memory of. Paul Pena was the extraordinary blues musician. I met him on the radio. He called me up when I was very first in San Francisco, because he was intrigued by my sound and the didgeridoo, and he was already doing the throat singing that brought him great notoriety later in his life with the film Genghis Blues, which follows his journey. Paul Pena, a blind musician based in San Francisco, but he wrote Big Old Jet Airliner, the Steve Miller Band had a hit with, and multiple wonderful music from back in the 70s, but came into his own once again with his connection to the tube and throat singing. Yeah, he was an extraordinary person.
Yeah, the late Paul Pena, and you're actually in Genghis Blues. You have a little bit of some screen time.
I'm in it for like 3 seconds. It's like I always ask those guys why. I just recently saw it. There was a 20th anniversary showing in San Francisco, and Rocco and Adrian Bellich, who made the film, plus many of their crew were there on hand. So we had a bit of a reunion. But I always wondered why they put me in the film. I know why, because I had experienced the Tubans in San Francisco along with Paul Pena the first time he met them.
Yeah, well, I think they actually liked you too. So I think that's part
of
that.
That.
Yeah, a really interesting aside. My son used to tag along with me and go see Stephen's concerts in the Bay Area when he was really, really young. And last year in high school, his social studies teacher or geography teacher actually played Genghis Blues for the classroom. So, yeah, so he saw you and says, "Oh, I know that guy." That's Stephen Kent. So kind of an interesting aside to the movie. What are you up to these days, Stephen? What's your output these days?
Well, the band that I formed with Beth Custer when I very first came to San Francisco in the early 90s, Transmission, is we're hot-footing it at the end of a long process of trying to come out with a new album after 20 years of no recorded output. So we made 4 albums in the 90s and then went different ways, and we've reconvened as a trio with Peter Val-Simonson.
Okay, it looks like we've got another frozen situation here, so I need to kind of reboot this. YouTube is not being all that cooperative today. So let me try and do the screen share again and start the video. We're winding down, so hang in there. It's almost over. Although Steven's great. He has a lot of good stories, a lot of good information. So let me just try this one more time, and when I'm done, I'll play some of his music. We'll do like one track. Okay, here we go. Let me try this again.
The drums, and we're trying to finish this, doing the last nuts and bolts of tidying up a new album project. I'm playing a lot with Baraka Moon, which is my band with Sukawat Ali Khan, a Pakistani singer of great history. It's got 13 generations, 600 years of vocal tradition in his family. And his father was one of the great names of Indian subcontinental classical music of the last century. Where we play Qawwali, Sufi, mainly Sufi, very ecstatic Sufi dance music with didgeridoo.
Yeah.
And other things are happening. I'm I'm moving towards what the culture that is known as sound healing, while I have some awkwardness around that terminology for myself. I'm doing work that is journey work with Jeffrey Alphonsus Mooney, who's a multi-instrumentalist and ritualist, and we're doing, journeying musical experiences for people, which are more of an experience than a concert per se.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing many things. Radio, I still got a radio presence.
So are you doing KPFA still?
Yeah, so it's not, I was weekly on KPFA for 22 years, and then it's become more sporadic, but I'm doing Monday night, 10 till midnight California time in the second half of the month. So the third, fourth, and like this month, 5th Monday, 10 till midnight California time. It's called Off the Beaten Path, and archives for 2 weeks after broadcast. Mm-hmm. And then I do a monthly World Music of the World show.
Okay, well, we'll put some of those links up in the show page here, so you can follow Stephen through his website and through the radio output. And real quick, just a big shout out to the members of Transmission. I know we talk about Wayne Shorter and Ayrto and Herbie, but there's a whole other group of people who are incredibly talented, a little bit under the radar. You got Beth, Kenneth Newby, John Luce, Peter, Ida, who would come in and sing as well. Just an insanely group of talented people. And really, in a lot of ways, kind of a hub for kind of this really cool, kind of organic fusion, interesting scene in the Bay Area. And you guys played a really large role in a lot of people's lives during that time.
Yeah, well, that was the next voyage for me after Lights in a Fat City. I arrived in the Bay Area with Lights in a Fat City. We performed in this area for over a month and a half, and I never left, is essentially what happened, and made a lot of great connections with the Bay Area music scene back in the 90s that remain with me to this day. And so that's where Beth Custer and I have come full circle, although we've been playing, she and I, together and occasionally with Peter for over the last 10 years on and off. We're now really focusing that trio. And it's a worthy successor to the 90s edition of Transmission. And Baraka Moon, again, comes out of the City of Tribes, which was the label that we all coalesced around in the 90s. Baraka Moon also has a connection to that time in the late 90s, where I did occasionally perform with Sukawat's band, the Ali Khan band, and now we have Baraka Moon. I'm also working with a string quartet here based in the Bay Area, the Del Sol Quartet, performing the music of Australia's greatest contemporary composer, Peter Sculthorpe, who wrote a lot of music for didgeridoo and string quartet, which I also have a big connection to.
Right. Yeah. Weren't you Scriabin in a past life? Isn't that the word in the street?
I never heard that one.
Somebody told you that you were, was it Scriabin? It was
Scriabin?
Yeah, I remember this.
Really?
Somebody came. Maybe I should write your book, Stephen.
Yeah.
You can just correct me when I get it wrong. I'll make up the rest. No, so you were somewhere. I think it might have been Germany or someplace like that. And some guy came up to you and said, "I think you were Scriabin in a past life."
Quite possible. People say the darndest things, don't they?
Yeah.
I did go though. A couple of years ago, I was honored to work and play and do a whole symposium in the little hut in the woods that Gustav Mahler wrote so much of his compositions in Austria. I was the Mahler I forget what they call it, but Komponistenhaus.
Right. You know, there's this kind of new like controversy that Mahler stole a lot of his stuff. Are you aware of that?
No, but if he was stealing his stuff, he was putting it together in a very beautiful location by a lake in southern Austria.
Yeah, I'll send you some of the links in that if you're interested. Is this the first time you're going to be performing in Texas?
I did perform once at the South by Southwest in Austin. It was 20 years ago, and it was with a Japanese taiko drummer, and that it brought me to go on about 8 tours of Japan, just coming to Austin for that one little showcase. And I did do a solo concert in Austin on another occasion, but it's my first time anywhere outside of Austin performing in Texas.
I think I remember that taiko thing. I remember when you did that. That was pretty interesting. Well, we're really excited to have you. Really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great night. Everybody that's going to be at the event is going to have an amazing time getting exposed to your music if they haven't heard it. You're going to be with us on Saturday during the day, and my good friend Steve Crimmy, who's a huge fan of yours, is going to be interviewing you because he knows your catalog inside and out, and that's going to be a really cool experience. So if you're in the Hill Country and you want to see Stephen, I'll have a few passes available for the Saturday night concert, and I still have a very few spots available for the entire weekend. So you get Stephen, and you get a bunch of other stuff too. But Stephen, I'm really excited, and it's going to be great to see you again.
I'm very much looking forward to playing, and it sounds like a beautiful acoustic environment to be playing the didgeridoo in.
Yeah, I think you once you understand the dynamics, you're going to have fun with the place. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm totally looking forward to it.
All right, Stephen, I'm going to turn you loose and let you commune with that mountain. So
I think I'll go. Maybe I'll go take a hike up the mountain.
So thanks for spending time with us today, and I'll see you in a few weeks. Okay.
That's right. Looking forward. Thank you. Take care.
All right. That's whoa. Just rolling right along there. Anyway, that was me and Stephen from yesterday, and Steve Crimmy is going to be interviewing him on Saturday before the concert, which is going to be a lot of fun. And Steve is, I think he's still in the chat. Knows his catalog inside and out. So it's just one of those things, one of those kinds of Gemini synchronistic things that we'd be connected through. And so it's really interesting. They're both named Steve. They're both Geminis. And then of course, Steve in North Carolina, Steve Crimmy, is a big fan. So I mean, that's just kind of where this thing is going. And I expect more of these things over this weekend. I wanted to play a piece of Stephen's music, if I can find one really quickly here. which shouldn't be that hard. Let me see if I can dial one up. And there's a few tracks on YouTube. Let me go to YouTube. Oh, let's see what we got here. So this is let me play this. This is only about a minute long, and this is Stephen playing this enormous didgeridoo. I've actually never seen this before. Let me tee this thing up. And in typical Gemini fashion, Stephen is ambidextrous. He can play multiple instruments simultaneously, and he does circular breathing. Then I'll play one other track here. Let me go full screen on this thing. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, I'm gonna go full screen on it. Okay. Let me start from the beginning. Hold on. I got to figure it. So I want to go full screen. Give me 1 second. Let me go back to. All right. So I got to do the share mode. So I'll just start off with share, and then we go full screen. So, all right, here we go. This is Stephen. I've never heard this before, but it should sound fairly interesting. Yeah, so I'd never seen that one before. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, look at the size of that thing, man. So yeah, so he will get into circular breathing. He'll do some of that when he the circular breathing stuff is actually pretty. It's fairly therapeutic and healing in a lot of ways. The people that have had some respiratory issues have learned how to play the didgeridoo and circular breathing. It's really helped them. Really helped them. There we go. All these various windows that I've got going on here. Look at that. portals, dimensions. There it is. Click. We're Back to the Future. Back to the Future. All right, let me get out of there. This is Robert Phoenix. Thanks for being a part of the Friday FARcast today and sort of diving into this notion of diversity and, you know, the organic kind of blending and fusion of people and styles and sounds and music and all those things, which can and do happen, and especially in places like sports and arts and entertainment. It's not uncommon. And then we have this synthetic version of diversity with its forced rules, even exclusionary access on some level. Because if anything is truly diverse, it's going to include everybody and not exclude one group or one group and subgroups. And to me, that model is really just nothing more than another version of mind control and ultimately pitting groups and people against one another. And it's a strategy. It's an operation. That's all it is. All right. So I'm out of here. This is Robert Phoenix. Thanks for chiming in. Thank you, Stephen Kent, for spending time with me. This is kind of the end of the time where you can get rooms for the event. I'll have the link up in the chat. There are some people that are coming out for one day who are kind of local, and that's cool. That's fine. And a lot of you guys are in the chat room anyway, so yeah, it's fine. But the hotel rooms, today's the cutoff day. So have yourself a great weekend. I'll be back on Sunday night with the 11th house, and there's a lot to talk about astrologically. We got a lot of charts that we're going to break down. So use your head of discernment, what's real, your heart, two-step when it's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and you are you until further notice. Take good care.